Have you ever felt it? That strange pause in the middle of a normal day, when everything goes quiet for just a moment, like the world holds its breath and something deep inside you suddenly stirs. It's not a sound, not a thought, not even a feeling you can name. It's just ... there. And you know it didn't come from you. Maybe it happens while you're driving in silence, and suddenly your chest tightens without reason. Maybe you wake up from sleep, heart racing, because a dream left a message behind that you can't quite remember. Or maybe it's even simpler. You hear someone say something ordinary, and for no reason at all, that sentence echoes inside you for days. That's how God speaks. Not in thunder, not in drama, not in words that shake the ground, but in moments that shake you. And the strange part is, He's always been speaking. But the truth is, most of us never learned how to hear Him. We were taught to listen to the loudest voices, the news, the notifications, the endless thoughts in our heads. But the voice of God isn't loud. It's still, it's steady, and it never competes. It just waits. Waits for you to get quiet enough, honest enough, present enough to finally notice what's been calling you all along. We like to think communication is about sound, about speech, about something we can hear with our ears. But what if the real language of God is silence? What if it's not the words, but the spaces between them? What if His messages are hidden in timing, in patterns, in how things fall apart and how they come together? You pray for answers, and instead your plans collapse. You ask for peace, and instead everything gets louder. But maybe that disruption is the answer. Maybe it's not rejection, it's redirection. Because here's the thing, God doesn't give explanations, He gives invitations. He doesn't hand you a map. He places a stirring in your soul and waits to see if you'll follow it. And that stirring never comes in comfort. It always comes in discomfort, in restlessness, in confusion, in moments when your logic has nothing left to offer. You'll call it a gut feeling, or intuition, or maybe just emotion. But what if that ache you keep avoiding is actually a message? What if the anxiety, the longing, the sense that something is missing, what if that is not a flaw in your system, but a holy frequency trying to break through the noise? And every time you ignore it, distract from it, silence it with scrolling or sound, you delay the conversation your soul was meant to have, the conversation where God doesn't tell you what to do. He reminds you of who you are. You won't find that voice in the crowd. You won't hear it when you're rushing or comparing or pretending. You have to stop. You have to be still long enough for the surface of your mind to settle, so the depth of your soul can speak. And when it does, it won't sound like a sentence. It won't come as a command. It might just come as clarity, a peace that makes no sense, a knowing you can't explain, a sudden release of pain you've carried for years. And the more you pay attention to those moments, the more you realize they were never random. The people who showed up when you needed them, the timing that seemed too perfect, the doors that closed right before disaster. That wasn't coincidence. That was language, divine language, the kind that isn't spoken, it's revealed, not to your ears, but to your awareness. And once you start to recognize that voice, you begin to trust it. Not because it promises you an easy life, but because it leads you toward a truer one. A life where you're no longer living from fear or performance or control, but from presence, from purpose, from peace. And the beauty of it is, you don't have to find that voice. You just have to stop running from it, because it's already here. It's been whispering underneath your thoughts for years. And the moment you stop to truly listen is the moment your real life begins. There comes a time in your life when you stop asking for signs and start looking at your story. You begin to notice the chapters that felt like accidents were actually alignment. You realize the moments that broke you were the very moments that opened you. And slowly, piece by piece, you start to see the thread. That quiet thread running underneath all your pain, all your delays, all your mistakes, leading you not away from yourself, but deeper into who you were always meant to become. And maybe that S, the truest form of divine communication, not the words we wait to hear, but the life we're already living. Every detour, every heartbreak, every unanswered prayer was not silence. It was strategy. God speaks not only through comfort, but through contrast, by showing you what you thought you wanted and then removing it, so you could learn what you truly need. He lets you build your tower just high enough to see how fragile it was. Not to shame you, but to show you that anything built without soul won't stand. And when it crumbles, you think he's punishing you. But what if he's freeing you? What if the collapse was the beginning of clarity? What if the breaking wasn't the end of the message, but the place where it finally became loud enough for you to hear? The voice of God often shows up when you've run out of your own, when you've tried every method, every distraction, every plan, and nothing brings peace. That's when it begins. Not with fireworks, but with stillness. You sit alone in a quiet room, no longer asking, no longer planning, just breathing. And suddenly something opens. Not in your head, but in your chest. A release. A softness, a feeling like something is being poured into you that you didn't know you were missing. That is the beginning of sacred hearing, not with your ears, but with your presence. That's when you realize God doesn't speak in volume, he speaks in vibration, in alignment, in presence, and most of all, he speaks in truth, not the kind of truth that comes from books or beliefs, but the kind that arrives when you've surrendered, when you've stopped pretending, stopped running, stopped demanding answers. Instead, you've simply said, I'm here, I'm listening, and in that surrender, something shifts. The questions don't get solved, but they stop screaming. The pain doesn't disappear, but it no longer owns you. That's how you know you've heard him. Not because the world got louder, but because you got quieter. Not because you were given a message, but because you became one. And once you begin to live like that, as a message, not just a seeker, become the answer to someone else's prayer without even knowing it. You walk into a room and someone breathes easier. You speak a truth that unlocks something in a person you've just met. Not because you're special, but because you're open. Because you've let the divine flow through you without needing to explain it, label it, or prove it. You've stopped needing to be right and started learning how to be real. And that's the purest communication of all, because it doesn't come from the mouth, it comes from the soul. The way you hold space for others, the way you forgive, the way you love without agenda. These are God's words written through your life. And when you begin to live from that place, miracles stop feeling rare. They become natural. Not big flashes of change, but tiny confirmations that you are no longer lost, you're aligned. And in alignment, life itself becomes the conversation. You wake up, and the wind feels like a message. A child's laughter feels like a scripture. A quiet moment of gratitude feels like prayer. And you stop asking, where is God? Because the question itself dissolves. You don't need to find him anymore. You've become still enough to finally feel him. There comes a moment, if you've listened long enough, when even the questions fade, when you no longer ask, "Is that you, God?" Because you already know, not in your head, not in a sentence you can repeat, but in your entire being. There's a stillness inside you that can't be shaken anymore, a peace that no longer depends on things going your way. And when you realize something profound. The voice of God is not something outside you, reaching in. It's something within you, rising up, not your ego, not your fear, but the part of you that was always connected, the part that existed before your name, before your wounds, before you were taught who to be. That part doesn't speak in words, it speaks in presence. And when that presence fills you, you don't need validation, explanation, or control. You just need to be. And in that being, you understand things no book ever taught you. You feel truths you've never read. And you see the world not as something to fix or conquer, but with love, with stillness, with open hands. Because now you understand that God was never trying to tell you how to live. He was simply trying to remind you how to listen. And what's even more beautiful is that this kind of hearing never stops. It deepens. In the quiet clink of a spoon against a coffee mug, in the way sunlight slips across your floor in the morning, in the eyes of someone who simply sees you. And this is the moment you realize the sacred was never separate. The divine was never elsewhere. You were never disconnected. You were just distracted, pulled into noise, into identity, into survival. But now, little by little, those layers are falling away. You laugh differently. You pray differently. Not with desperation, but with intimacy. Not to get something, but to give yourself fully. And even in your flaws, you no longer feel shame, because now you know that your imperfections are not obstacles to God, they're invitations. Every tear, every failure, every forgotten prayer was a doorway, and He stood on the other side, not waiting to judge, but to embrace. And the moment you stopped performing and started feeling, that was the moment the door opened. That was the moment His voice stopped being a mystery and started being your home. So maybe the real question isn't, how does God communicate with you? Maybe the question is, are you still enough to notice? Maybe it's not about hearing something new, but remembering something ancient, a truth you've carried in your bones since before you were born. And maybe that's why silence feels so hard, because it leads you straight back to that truth. And truth is powerful. It changes everything. It softens you. It humbles you. It burns away what was false and leaves behind only what is real. And what's real is this: you were never alone. You were never abandoned. Every breath you've taken has been a conversation. Every moment of pain, every second of beauty, every time you chose love instead of fear, that was God speaking through you, with you, as you. He doesn't need to prove Himself, because His voice lives in everything, especially you, not in noise, not in perfection, but in quiet, constant presence. And if you can feel that now even, just a little, then you've already heard Him.